Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Maya Markovich. Maya is the head of growth at NextLaw Labs, where she delivers next-generation technology process, client, and business growth services across the globe for Dentons' ecosystem, including the acceleration of legal tech startups. Maya has previous experience in product marketing and management. She has also been regularly recognized as a leader in legal innovation, being named as one of 5 influential women of legal tech by the ILTA in 2020, and a woman leading legal tech by the Technologist in 2019. So a very, very warm welcome, Maya.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And before we dive into all your amazing achievements and legal experiences to date, we do have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, how real would you rate the reality series Suits in terms of its reality?
Well, it does get some things right. I think some firms have a culture of that kind of office politics, not the kind of firm I'd want to work for. Long hours, stress on personal lives. I think that's pretty realistic. But I think obviously for the audience, they need to have a lot of variety. So they seem to work on cases all over the map, like M&A and criminal defense and employment. And I think in real life, lawyers have to at least choose a path between litigation versus transactional. So I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, probably a 4.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. And I think it's great that I've obviously seen the show and know that, because when I tried to explain it to certain people, I was like, no, it must be real. I was like, it's very rare for somebody to have done family to employment to transactional to litigation. But anyway, Let's start at the beginning. Tell our listeners a bit about your family background and upbringing.
I love this question, actually. And I've been such a fan of listening to other guests' responses to this. So, my family background is I grew up in Silicon Valley, actually in a quiet little town called Palo Alto. My parents were in academia. We spent sabbatical years in Paris with my father's side of the family. My background is mostly Russian. Both sides were refugees from the 1917 revolution. And so they settled in California and Paris, respectively. So I learned Russian and French, and I have a really deep gratitude for the kind of immense strength and resilience, that flows through our veins. We grew up with a really strong focus on social impact, curiosity, awareness of the wider world, education, and respect of different perspectives. So meanwhile, we were growing up, the tech industry exploded around us. It's always sort of been there. It was never really foreign or unknown to me as a concept for improving the way that things are done. I went to Stanford for undergrad and master's in behavioral science. I did a semester abroad in Russia and worked for several summers at nonprofits there. At Stanford, I learned the science behind human patterns and drivers, really always in the context of this human and societal impact, and how to question not only my assumptions, but really everything. So it really inspired me to actively pursue the skill of critical thinking and become a more active version, questioner of the status quo, which is really how all innovation begins. And so then I started my professional career in change management consulting in technology. I was part of a team that conducted on-site organizational effectiveness analysis, developed, targeted plans to support project implementation, everything from communications and coaching plans and training, overcoming resistance. All of those were really geared towards maximizing employee engagement and driving faster adoption. That was fascinating, of course, but, something was missing for me. So I struck out on a long trip by myself around the world and spent a lot of time thinking hard about what I wanted to do. And it was, something with broader social impact. So I went to law school and I practiced for several years. I was inevitably in charge of the technology, and I became really intrigued by how, it could improve results for clients and let teams, spend more time on strategic and creative tasks. And I really saw it as a challenge to the equitable access to justice. So I eventually made the leap over to the provider side, targeted, various angles of the business and practice of law in product management and product marketing roles. During this time, I also became a mother, a role which really made me a more successful professional, more resilient, efficient, patient, motivated. There's a lot of research to back that up. And then NextLaw Labs found me, just as it was getting off the ground. And I immediately recognized this opportunity to bring together, all these threads of my experience in a totally groundbreaking way. And nowadays, in addition to the big law focus of legal innovation, I'm also really deeply invested in the future of the legal industry, legal education, increased inclusion in the industry, and how tech can really positively impact access to justice. I spend a lot of time mentoring early career professionals, social impact legal tech startups, and serving on the boards of a few organizations that support equitable delivery of legal services.
Yeah, and you're doing so much phenomenal work. You're light years ahead of so many in the profession, which definitely makes you stand out for all the great works that you're doing. So I just want to unpack a lot of that because there's quite a lot in there. So you mentioned before working as you are today, Chief Growth Officer at NextLaw Labs, you worked in product marketing, I think at Mark Monitor. So just tell us more, what was that like?
Well, it's interesting because once I went over to the vendor side and the provider side, I actually worked as a product manager was my first role. And I was the only non-engineer on the team. And I was brought in to kind of represent the user perspective, which, at the time was uncommon, to say the least. And as part of that role, this is before that. This is when I was working at Summation. Because I was the lawyer, the fuzzy versus the techie, I did a lot of the kind of translation of these deep technical concepts into understandable language. And so that kind of led me naturally to focus more on the product marketing side of things of the product manager role. And then I just realized that I could do a lot more there. And I wasn't going to advance all that much in product management beyond, a director of product management because I didn't have a tech background, especially here in Silicon Valley. So, and I found that kind of client interaction also very critical, and having the role of kind of making sure that voice is continually represented and, was something that kind of came naturally to me. And I really liked it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, I think you are doing a great role that you're currently involved with. But I want to talk a little bit about what exactly NextLaw Labs is. So for those that might be new to the organization, tell us about it.
Sure. So NextLaw Labs was founded back in 2015. It was the first initiative of its kind. Nothing like this existed in the legal industry prior to this. And our mandate is to, it's broadly to change the business and practice of law via technology. So I get to work on an incredibly wide variety of, high impact internal and external facing projects. Our aim is to curate, pilot, and adapt legal tech and processes to address the challenges in this business or practice of law, both internal at the firm and client needs. So we take a very user-centric, practical approach, and we try to focus on providing these cost-effective solutions that can show real-time value that we can measure.
Yeah, and I just think it's incredible because it's definitely a continuous improvement organization, and I love all the innovative things that you are doing. So yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying watching the journey. So for you, going back to you moved to NextLaw Labs then in 2016, I believe. You touched on it a bit earlier, but I just want to dig a bit deeper. So how and why did you decide to make that transition?
Well, for one thing, a recruiter reached out to me and was explaining it to me. And to be honest with you, I'd just never heard anything of the sort. Just nothing like this existed. And really, the words legal innovation or innovation connected with the legal industry, I had never heard the two words in the same sentence. It made perfect sense to me because finally, all of the things that I had been focusing on up until that point seemed to come together, like I said, in this very groundbreaking way. And it was a relief, honestly, to see that there was someone else out there who wasn't shocked when I tried to explain that, I never left using psychology when I decided to pivot from doing that to going to law school. The two paths are not divergent. In fact, they're absolutely complementary. And, a lot of that is at the time was, one of my very first questions was, how are you going to get lawyers to participate? And they were like, well, we've got, these ideas for these incentive programs. And, we want to kind of tap into this breaking wave of legal technology that's happening, which at the time was, there were 75 self-described legal tech startups out there 5 years ago, and now there's, close to 2,000, depending on who's counting. it was just a moment in time that I'm really glad that I took the leap, because to be honest with you, I was thinking I would just take another job that was similar to kind of the product marketing roles in a field that I kind of understood. And this was just, it's an awesome job.
Yeah. It's a cool job. I agree with you. So let's talk about competition and difference, because, NextLaw Labs, is definitely a leading legal technology innovation catalyst, but it's a very crowded marketplace when you say legal tech. So just tell us more about this and perhaps what you think makes the company so different.
I mean, of course, there are many things. And to be honest with you, in the last 5 years, the traction that we've seen these concepts and these types of organizations and departments take hold is a wonderful sign. I mean, we think that a rising tide truly lifts all boats. And the more people are focused on this and focused on incorporating it into client service delivery, the better, honestly. And so it's really great to see kind of the pivot more and more to client-centered service delivery. I think there are a couple of things. So first of all, we have NextLaw Ventures, which is our NextLaw Labs investment arm, which was also founded simultaneously in the early years in 2015. And the way that we did that was we started out by polling as many people as we could about, internally and externally within the Dentons ecosystem about the challenges that they were facing. So we started with a list of a prioritized list of challenges, and then we went out and tried to figure out how we would solve them, be it in developing something internally, partnering with the client to develop something, or investing in an early stage legal tech startup, which pretty much everything was legal stage. It was early stage back then. And so we developed this portfolio. And so I spend a lot of time accelerating these companies. We don't have like cohorts that come through or anything like that. We have, once we're invested, or in many cases also we partner with legal tech companies that we have not invested in, but there's some mutually beneficial relationship, an arrangement that we can come up with. And so we have equity in some and not in others, but we work with them to accelerate the innovation that they represent within the firm. The other thing is, I think Dentons' innovation drive is so strong that it's probably harder for us to keep up with demand, and connect the dots on innovation happening across 200 offices, worldwide. It's like 12,000 attorneys now, than it is for us to convince attorneys that it's kind of a necessary evolution. And so I spend many of my days kind of with change management. I draw on that experience to maximize engagement and overcome resistance. I could be vetting potential startups. I could be accelerating them. I could be working with attorneys to explore those new solutions and consulting with clients on their legal workflow challenges, and also engaging in strategic planning with global practice leaders to kind of define and execute their practice innovation strategies. So our remit is very broad. It's hard to say if everyone else's remit is also broad, but because we sit at the global level, we're able to help, touch and support and work and collaborate with all of the different regions in different ways.
Yeah, and as I say, I just love the connectivity of the organization as well. And you touched on it there a lot around innovation, because NextLaw's slogan is "Our innovation knows no bounds," which I just love. So just tell us more about that sort of slogan and how that sort of lived and breathed day to day.
Indeed. I mean, as I described, our remit is incredibly broad, and I am incredibly grateful for that, because along with that comes a lot of autonomy and responsibility, of course. But, I'm encouraged to pursue the things that make me curious, ponder these big questions, imagine ways, to have measurable impact. And I ask a lot of questions like, what would happen if we changed this? Can we reframe that constraint as an opportunity? How does the client view this situation? How do we articulate the goal of this project? And so in that way, bringing innovation to the legal industry for us is as broad as almost as we can imagine it. And of course, we have to from there, we just have to prioritize where we put our resources.
Yeah, well said. And I think you definitely have one of those cool jobs within the legal space. So I guess it'd be great to know, the day in the life of a chief growth officer. I know you've touched on various points, but what does a typical day in layman's terms look like for you?
I mean, again, it's all over the map. Honestly, like I said, I spend a lot of time. No 2 days are the same. I spend a lot of time with clients, helping them hand in hand with our NextLaw in-house solutions sister company. And a lot of those conversations revolve not around tech at all, but around articulating those challenges, helping internal stakeholders at Dentons understand where the clients are so that we can meet them where they are and have this kind of holistic approach to client service, understanding their challenges deeply and what the kind of pressures that they're under. Internally, of course, like I spend a lot of time working on just providing visibility into the work that's being done across the regions and how other regions who are interested in doing similar projects can scale them up to the global level, or at least the cross-regional level. So we work a lot on transparency and this kind of the awareness building. As legal innovation develops and we move further through the disruptive cycle within our industry, we're doing a lot more of that higher level work within the firm. Our team collaborated with colleagues across the globe to create an innovation hub, which is a communications channel, which is designed to increase awareness, promote adoption of all these innovative solutions that are being used and worked on and developed by Dentons lawyers and professionals. Obviously, the users are particularly interested in the value that's created when these solutions are adopted, plus exploring innovation activity and how to talk to clients about innovation and market intelligence and that kind of thing. That's particularly crucial, I think, in our Varian structure, where regions operate autonomously with all the great innovative work that's being done. And we're also doing global training on innovation on another kind of branch of this with the Dentons Global Next Talent Initiative, which is focused on providing these critical tools and resources for Dentons professionals to really unlock innovation in their day-to-day activities. Boost efficiencies and effectiveness, and again, always be focused on delivering new value for clients, because that's the key differentiator. Just, providing excellent legal advice is table stakes. Clients expect that now. But finding these new ways to support clients where they are now and where they will be next year in the future is really our goal.
Yeah, and you're just great at identifying the pain points, and then providing those valuable solutions. So yeah, I just love everything that you're doing. And what I also love about you as well is that you give back, right? And you also serve on boards that you lightly touched on earlier. So from NextLaw, One Justice, I think Legal Access Alameda as well, and as a mentor to Legal Geeks Women in Tech, in Law Tech. So just tell us more about some of these roles.
I feel that at this moment in my career, I have somehow stumbled upon having a bit of a bully pulpit. And people tend to ask me what I think about things. And I think it's incredibly important to remind people at all times, where we are in the legal industry, how incredibly fortunate we are to work in an industry which is flourishing right now. And at the same time is leaving a huge number of people on earth behind. And so, the vast majority of people who need access to legal services can't afford them, can't access them. And so I try to focus as much as I can on leveraging what I've got to kind of support those efforts in every way possible. I wish I could do it all the time. I wish I had, 48 hours in a day. The other thing I think is really important is, within the legal industry, to think about the ways that we need to be supporting the future generations of who we want to continue the legal industry itself. And so, I think right now we're not doing a good job as an industry or in legal education. We're not preparing students for what they need to know, the skills that they're going to need to excel. And at the same time, all these pressures are converging because the work, I think, is actually increasing. I don't think, things are going to go away with the robots. I think that, there's increasing regulatory issues, that there's cybersecurity issues, there's, privacy issues. More and more things are highly regulated and going to need more lawyers to do these things, but do them in a different way. And, the whole point behind why NextLaw Labs was founded was that the legal industry just hasn't benefited from technology in the way that most other industries have. And technology is kind of a buzzword. Often it isn't technology at all. It is just putting on a different lens and thinking about why people make decisions. and things, as basic as that.
Very
and
true.
I feel so lucky that these things that are inherently so fascinating to me are actually what I'm supposed to be doing all day.
Landing on the dream job there. Okay. And you talked a lot about sort of inclusion and helping people. What advice would you give to other women who perhaps want to get involved in legal tech?
Well, for one thing, I would suggest taking every opportunity that is presented to you. I think it's really important to realize that it's commonly out there. I see it on LinkedIn occasionally revisited, and that is that women don't apply for jobs unless they think they hit like 100% of the requirements, whereas men will typically apply for a job that they think they have 60% of the requirements for. And I think you can kind of extrapolate that even more broadly. Take out every opportunity that's offered, even if you think you're not quite ready for it. And doing things for the first time is challenging, but it really leads to professional growth, more, emotional intelligence, and it can be kind of addictive. More and more of the non-lawyers are coming into this industry, which I think is a blessing. We need more people from other industries coming in. But I think, people often leave the practice of law for negative reasons, burnout and constraints and hierarchy, just for another career, just because it's different from their current situation, without really giving much thought to leveraging the valuable experience that they've gained from being a lawyer. And especially in the last year, I've seen just an influx of women that are in this very exact situation. Because of the pandemic, I think has just exacerbated all of that. So I always recommend, instead of this escape approach, to really consider the positive aspects of your legal career. What drew you to it in the first place? Parsing those out and thinking creatively about how they can be applied differently in another sphere. We excel at critical thinking, communication, problem solving, persevering, even if it's an ambiguous, situation or there's a setback, and thinking about what parts you liked best and going in that direction, applying those well-honed skills differently, and also engaging them to evaluate your options, right? Sort through them and pursue a path that is, personally and professionally rewarding.
Yeah, really, really love
easier
that.
Said than done, but it's a process.
Absolutely. It is. It is definitely a process, but you've just got to keep going. Okay, I like the fact that you've talked a lot around sort of inspiring and nurturing the next generation of legal professionals as well. So do you think that future lawyers will need to be legal techies?
Yeah, I love this question because no, people do not need to be coding, in my opinion. I'm on that side of the fence on that one.
Okay.
To thrive in the legal industry of the future, which is now the present, really, lawyers need some foundational literacies, right? Like a basic understanding of data science, what you can do with data, money management, design thinking, project management. They also, I think, need to develop competency in flexibility, creativity, collaboration, emotional intelligence, which, by the way, you don't necessarily have to be born with. Those things are learnable. And I think in order to truly affect change, lawyers with character qualities of resilience and creativity, that comfort with ambiguity and a bias to action, and comfort with trial and error are really going to have the most impact. So that's not necessarily being a techie, but, some understanding of what it takes to actually build tech, sure. But not building it, unless you're in a hybrid role where you're building these tools to streamline workflow for, those that are billing the hours.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good and important point to stress, because I think a lot of people get confused about what they may or may not need to do. Okay, so just a couple of final questions before we wrap up. And these are quite ambiguous questions, but what do you predict to be the biggest changes in the legal profession, say over the next 5 years or so, and why?
I love this because in 5 years, someone's going to, revisit this and be like, she was wrong on everything. Right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing, right? Where we're trying to take the industry, I will caveat what I'm about to say by saying that where we're trying to take the industry, there is no roadmap, right? We're all just sitting around trying to intuit these trends and directions and kind of forcefully move forward in some unknown, to an unknown destination. We know there are so many things that need to be changed. And at the same time that there's such an opportunity right now to do it right. I think, in general, a continuation of trends around technology, a business-minded practice, reaction to these changing dynamics of competition, continued increased focus on the client experience. Client expectations are continually increasing. There's going to be more and more emphasis on the value-based services and different kinds of pricing models. So law firms really have to respond by boosting client service, and the service experience, better transparency, more collaboration tools, lots of value-added services. Internally, in legal departments and firms and everywhere, I think there's going to be this, obviously, increased mainstreaming of tech into the day-to-day, right? So all of the sort of turn the crank work, I think, will be kind of morphing dramatically. Automation of documents, diligence, mitigating risk, increasing efficiency. And I think there will also be more disaggregation of legal work to lower cost platforms. I think one other thing that I think is I'm starting to see quite a bit of, more and more signs of this is the fact that we have a moment in time here where most legal tech companies are still young and more are being founded all the time, which is incredibly necessary and normal in this disruptive cycle. The key is right now that there is an opportunity, and I'm seeing us moving towards this opportunity, which really makes me incredibly happy and hopeful that we're having discussions early on with legal tech providers as to the DEI, the equity in and the equity out kind of principles that they as providers bring to the table. Because law firms are under pressure themselves from clients to show that increasingly that their supply chain and the people that they're working with externally themselves to provide these client services are also hewing to these goals and aspirations of increased equity. I am also seeing more questions being asked around the tech stacks of legal tech companies. And are they being developed in a way such that, there are checks and balances around coding in bias to those tools? Because especially in the legal industry, you're not just doing something directly for a particular department in a company. Law is, as the wonderful Professor Kat Moon always says, is the OS of human society. And so our obligations are higher. And I think, and other industries that have gone through these kind of disruptive cycles with technology, didn't focus on that. And I think right now we're having these discussions simultaneously with increasing efficiency with a multi-billion-dollar transactional platform at the same time as technology that increases equity, directly for self-represented litigants. And all, the whole spectrum there and in between, how do we really focus on making sure that these technologies that we're using are not reinforcing bias and inequity? And so the fact that I'm seeing more and more investors asking these questions, as well as customers, and, I think it's more and more, we're going to hopefully be going in that direction. And I think we are.
Yeah, and it's going to be super, super exciting. And there's some real nuggets there. And I look forward to seeing how they all arise. I'm seeing a lot of, particularly you touched on it a bit before around the subscription side. I'm seeing a lot of law firms looking at those subscription models for services, particularly in the US at the moment. So, okay, my final question is, you've achieved so much. You've got a super inspiring legal background. What are some of your future plans and future goals? How do you keep yourself motivated?
Well, I have an incredible team. Everybody that I work with on the global innovation team at Dentons is a star player. So we are an A team that I truly enjoy working with. And we bring such complementary experiences and expertise to the table that it's hard to imagine a better kind of work situation. I keep myself motivated by continually trying to find ways that I can leverage the things that I'm learning on the job to effectively influence the positive trajectory of the legal industry. Sometimes I get, almost overwhelmed by my desire to just make real positive change, something, and where can I find the most traction? So I'm on the search for those always. But, the other thing that I have learned is that I have to be comfortable with never knowing everything, because there's just no way to keep track of everything that's going on. Even just trying to stay on top of the legal tech landscape is just an impossible task. So I just take, what I can from where I go. But, I see myself doing more and more, hopefully, with my extra 2 arms and extra 12 hours in the day, doing as much as I can, leveraging these kind of skills and experience towards an overall improvement in the industry, be it in legal education, access to justice, the technology equity, and legal tech nonprofits are incredibly intriguing to me. And I think that's a model that we need to explore more.
Yeah, no, and that's a great way for us to conclude, because I think there's so much more out there and to be solved within the legal industry. And I'm just loving the whole legal innovation, continuous improvement ethos and everything that you're doing. So if people want to get in touch about anything that's been discussed today, what's the best email or social media handles for them to get in touch with you, Maya? Do you want to give any shout outs? And we'll make sure we share them with this episode for you too.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I try as hard as I can to answer everybody because the conversations and the outreach that I get are beneficial for me as well. So I love it when people reach out to tell me that they disagreed with something I said or, that made them think about something or just learning about, what's happening in a different corner of the industry. So please do reach out. And, the best way to find me is probably on LinkedIn at Markovich Maya. Also, we have a NextLaw Labs website and blog where we try to keep up with all of our activities. And so if anyone wants to kind of dive into different types of discussions that we've had or different panels or different, topics, that's there as well. But I would say just reach out to me personally.
Yeah, I love that. And I just love how inclusive and responsive you are to your community. So that just leads me to say thanks an absolute million, Maya, for coming onto the show. It's been a real pleasure having you, learning more about NextLaw Labs, all your exciting ventures, what you've been up to and what's going on in the future. So from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, I'd like to wish you lots of continued success with the company. But for now, over and out.
Thank you.
This week's review comes from Josh991155. Josh says, great podcast. This is a really informative and enjoyable to listen to show. I strongly recommend for anyone going into the legal profession. Thank you so much, Josh. We really appreciate your kind words and support. It means the world to all of us here on the Legally Speaking podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Legally Speaking podcast. If you enjoyed the show and want to help support us, remember to leave us a rating and review on Apple iTunes. You can also support the show and gain exclusive benefits, bonus content, and much more by signing up to our Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/Legally Speaking podcast. Thanks for listening.